She grew up invisible, the cleaner's daughter, overlooked in the marble hallways where the powerful decided the future. On that day, as a billionaire was about to sign the biggest deal of his life, the 9-year-old girl raised her voice. "Don't sign that!" Everyone laughed, until they realized she had just saved them hundreds of millions. And when the magnate discovered what was hidden in that document, his face turned pale. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and make you think, subscribe to the channel. Every day there's a new, moving story that will transform your day. The morning sun glinted off the mirrored windows of the most imposing corporate building in downtown Chicago. From the top floor, 40 stories up, the city looked like a chessboard. Small, manageable, distant. Arthur Sterling observed this view every morning and always felt the same thing: absolute power. He owned one of the largest sustainable tech companies in North America, an empire built on intelligence, boldness, and, according to his critics, a generous dose of calculated coldness. On that Tuesday in March, Arthur was about to make the riskiest and most grandiose move of his career, signing an international merger with a European giant in the clean energy sector. The contract promised to expand his operations to 3 continents, position his revolutionary patents in the global market, and cement his name among the world's greatest entrepreneurs. Journalists from international outlets, Wall Street investors, and foreign executives in impeccable suits waited in the main hall. Television cameras were already strategically positioned. Glasses of French champagne awaited on silver trays. Everything had been meticulously calculated, reviewed, rehearsed, but in the basement of that glass and steel tower, far from the spotlights and crystal glasses, existed another world entirely. A world of faded blue uniforms, buckets of water with the pungent smell of bleach, and shifts that began long before dawn, when the city was still asleep. Maria was a vital part of this invisible world. A black woman, slender, with hands calloused from hard work and a tired but dignified gaze, she had been cleaning the company's corridors for 5 years. She worked in a reverent silence, as if she were part of the furniture, completely invisible to the executives who hurried past, speaking on their phones in English about millions of dollars. Maria single-handedly supported her daughter Lily, a 9-year-old girl with big, curious, and always attentive eyes. The girl attended a public school in the suburbs of the South Side, but that day she was there, sitting in a discreet corner of the luxurious penthouse. The school was on strike due to a shortage of teachers. There was no one to leave her with at home. Maria had asked the supervisor for permission, who agreed with one unyielding condition. The girl couldn't cause any trouble, couldn't make noise, couldn't even be noticed. Lily obeyed strictly. Sitting on a plastic stool next to her mother's cleaning cart, she flipped through a worn-out notebook, its cover already loose and pages yellowed with time. The notebook was filled with notes made in blue ballpoint pen, with neat, small handwriting to save space. Difficult words, complex phrases she heard on the streets, on crowded buses, in the company's hallways, on the TV playing at the neighbor's house. She deeply loved understanding what words truly meant. She read everything she came across: supermarket flyers, old newspapers abandoned on park benches, books tossed into the dumpster of the college near her home, medicine leaflets, even the contracts she saw adults sign without reading. No one knew, but Lily had an absolutely rare gift, the natural ability to see hidden patterns amidst apparent chaos. Words that seemed loose and disconnected to her formed clear meaning. Phrases that seemed innocent and technical to her carried dangerous traps and hidden intentions. It was as if she could see through the fog that complicated words intentionally created. As her mother cleaned the enormous glass windows with repetitive, precise movements, Lily attentively observed the activity in the main hall. The men in impeccable suits and Italian ties, the women in high heels and discreet but very expensive jewelry. The billionaire at the center of it all, serious, imposing, surrounded by a veritable human wall of lawyers carrying real leather briefcases. On the main polished mahogany table, an absurdly thick document awaited its fate. Almost 1,000 pages printed on special paper. No one would read all of it before signing. No one needed to, apparently. Trust was what moved that world of billion-dollar deals. But trust, Lily learned very early by observing the adult world, was an extremely dangerous word, especially when it involved a lot of money and people who smiled too much. On the other side of the hall, Arthur adjusted the Swiss watch on his wrist and spoke in a low voice with the lead attorney, Mr. David Miller, a 60-year-old man with perfectly combed grey hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Beside him, the foreign executive, a tall blonde man in a grey suit with a German accent, reviewed some final pages of the contract with a satisfied expression. Everything seemed to be on the perfect track. But Lily felt something different in the air, an invisible tension, as if everyone were acting in a play, reciting memorized lines. She couldn't explain exactly what it was, but her instinct as a silent observer rarely failed her. Something in that room wasn't right. Something important was about to happen. And for a reason she herself didn't fully understand, Lily felt she needed to pay very close attention to every detail, every word, every gesture of those powerful people who never looked her in the eye. The signing ceremony was finally about to begin. The murmur of side conversations gradually diminished until it became an expectant silence. Arthur Sterling adjusted the knot of his pure silk Italian tie, took a calculated sip of sparkling mineral water, and walked with firm steps towards the main table, where the fate of his company would be sealed. Flashes from professional cameras fired simultaneously, creating small explosions of light. TV cameras from national and international broadcasters recorded his triumphant entrance. He smiled for the lenses, a carefully controlled, perfectly rehearsed smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The lawyers were already positioned like chess pieces on a board. To Augusto's left sat Dr. Marcelo Tavares, the senior partner of one of the country's most expensive and prestigious law firms, with an impeccable reputation built over 30 years. To his right stood the foreign executive in a crisp grey suit, the direct representative of the European partner company, who maintained a calm and confident expression. Both exuded absolute certainty and total control of the situation. The monumental contract lay open, precisely on the final signature page. A French-branded gold pen, costing more than Jandira's monthly salary, waited patiently for Augusto's steady hand. From her discreet corner by the cleaning cart, Lucia could see everything with surprising clarity. She wasn't supposed to be looking. She was supposed to be quiet, head down, invisible as her mother had always taught her to be in these environments. But something deep and inexplicable bothered her intensely, a strange feeling in her stomach as if something very wrong was about to happen, and only she could sense it. While the adults spoke in low tones about astronomical numbers and growth percentages, she quietly approached the table, tiptoeing to avoid making a sound. No one noticed her presence. To these important, busy people, she simply didn't exist. Just the cleaner's daughter, part of the scenery, as relevant as the potted plants or the abstract art on the walls. Her sharp, trained eyes quickly scanned the open pages of the contract. Enormous words, dense paragraphs written in complex legal jargon, clauses numbered in Roman numerals that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. Most people would simply give up trying to understand. But Lucia wasn't most people. She read each line as if deciphering a secret code. And then, midway through the 12th paragraph on page 847, a specific phrase leaped off the page like a silent scream only she could hear. Irrevocable alienation of intangible assets under perpetual exclusivity and unilateral transfer of intellectual property. Lucia felt her heart pound violently. She knew each of those words individually. Alienation meant permanent transfer of ownership. Intangible assets were things you couldn't physically touch, but which were worth fortunes. Revolutionary ideas, exclusive patents, secret algorithms, trademarks. Irrevocable meant no possibility of return, ever. Perpetual meant forever, eternally. And unilateral meant only one side was transferring, only one side was losing. Something was deeply wrong with this document. With slightly trembling hands, she discreetly flipped through a few preceding pages, desperately searching for additional context. And that's when she found what she feared. Clause 47B, strategically hidden amidst other seemingly harmless technical paragraphs, transferred the absolute legal control of all patents developed by Augusto's company to the foreign partner. All of them, without exception, with no possibility of reversal. He was about to sign a contract that, in cold legal terms, would turn him into a mere employee, perhaps even a disposable consultant of his own creation, of the empire he had spent 20 years building. Lucia's heart was now beating so loudly she feared someone might hear. She glanced quickly at her mother, who was methodically cleaning the floor on the other side of the room, completely oblivious to what was happening. She looked at the billionaire, who at that very moment was reaching for the gold pen with a satisfied smile. She looked at the lawyers, who smiled with professional confidence and calculating eyes. And then, without fully considering the grave consequences that might follow, without calculating the risks to herself and her mother, the 9-year-old girl took a brave step forward and said, her voice thin but surprisingly firm and clear, "Don't sign that, sir." The silence that followed was absolutely instantaneous and oppressive, as if someone had pressed a magic button and turned off all the sound in the world. Every head turned simultaneously in her direction, with expressions of shock. Augusto froze completely, the gold pen suspended in midair. The foreign lawyer's blue eyes widened. Dr. Tavares turned pale. Jandira dropped her wet cleaning rag, feeling her blood run cold, terrified by what her daughter had just done. "What?" Augusto asked slowly, his deep voice naturally laced with genuine surprise and growing irritation. "What did you say, child?" Lucia swallowed hard. Her small hands trembled visibly at her sides, but something larger than fear propelled her forward. She took a deep breath and continued, pointing directly at the open document. "This part here, sir." She pointed with her index finger to the specific clause. "This part gives away absolutely everything you've created, all the patents, all the algorithms, all the ideas. And it says it's forever, that you can never take it back. Never. They'll take everything that's yours." An uncomfortable murmur quickly swept through the room like an invisible wave. Nervous, forced laughter echoed in some corners. One of the executives present muttered something in English to his colleague, shaking his head in disbelief. Dr. Marcelo Tavares immediately approached the table with quick steps, desperately trying to mask the evident discomfort taking over his usually controlled expression. "Mr. Montalvon, please," he said, his voice attempting to sound reassuring but coming out slightly too high-pitched. "The child clearly doesn't understand what she's saying. It's just standard technical legal language for international contracts of this magnitude. There's absolutely nothing irregular or concerning." But Augusto raised his right hand abruptly, cutting the lawyer off mid-sentence, and called for immediate silence. His eyes, normally as cold and calculating as sharp blades, now held something different, a spark of doubt, perhaps even genuine curiosity. He turned completely and fixed his piercing gaze directly on Lucia, completely ignoring all the other important people in the room. "What exactly did you see in this document?" His voice was calmer now, but charged with a dangerous tension, like a violin string stretched to its limit. Lucia took another deep breath, literally feeling the crushing weight of every gaze upon her. Through the corner of her eye, her mother, pale as a ghost, tried to approach discreetly to pull her away before the situation escalated further. But the billionaire made a firm, definitive gesture with his hand, signaling Jandira to stop exactly where she was. "Answer now," Augusto insisted, his voice firm but not aggressive. There was something in his tone that surprised Lucia herself. He genuinely wanted to hear what she had to say. The girl pointed again to the specific section of the contract, her fingers still trembling. "Here, sir, in clause 47B, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "it states that you are transferring the intangible assets to them. I read in a law book I found in the trash that this means patents, algorithms, trade secrets, original ideas. Everything you can't touch but is worth a lot of money. And down here," she pointed to another line, "it says this transfer is irrevocable and perpetual. This means you will never, ever, under any circumstances, be able to get these things back. Even if you find out you were tricked, even if you want to undo the deal, never again. It's forever." Dr. Tavares opened his mouth to protest again, but his voice came out less convincing this time. "Mr. Montalvo, honestly, with all due respect, the girl is clearly interpreting the clauses completely out of the appropriate legal context. This is an absolutely standard mutual protection clause that exists to..." "Then explain something very simple to me." Augusto cut him off again, and this time his voice was as cold as dry ice. "Why the heck does this mutual protection you keep mentioning only transfer my assets to them? Where's the part that protects my company? Where's the reciprocity that should exist in any fair agreement?" The lawyer visibly hesitated. For the first time in 30 years of an impeccable career, Dr. Marcelo Tavares didn't have a ready and convincing answer. The foreign executive in the grey suit nervously adjusted his tie, shifted his weight from one leg to the other, a visibly uncomfortable expression taking over his normally serene face. The silence returned to weigh on the air like molten lead. Augusto turned abruptly to his team of advisors, who were watching the scene with varying expressions of growing confusion and concern. "Stop everything immediately," he ordered with absolute authority. "I want an independent auditor from outside this company and with no prior connection to this deal, reviewing every comma of this contract now. Every word, every punctuation, every space, immediately. Sir, this is completely unnecessary. Dr. Tavares tried to argue one more time, but his voice already sounded desperate. "This will delay the entire process. It will cause diplomatic embarrassment with our international partners. It will..." "Now!" Augusto practically roared the word, and the pure authority in his voice left absolutely no room for discussion or questioning. The team of advisors moved immediately. Cell phones were taken from pockets. Urgent calls were made. In less than 15 intense minutes, a renowned expert in international corporate law was entering the room, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying laptops and a briefcase full of legal codes. They methodically pored over the gigantic document, page by page, while the room remained in an absolutely sepulchral and suffocating silence. The only audible sounds were the occasional rustle of pages being turned and the soft click of computer keys. Lucia quietly returned to her discreet corner, still trembling from head to toe. Jandira finally managed to approach and hugged her with protective strength, whispering softly in her ear that everything was okay, that they would leave soon, that nothing bad would happen. But the girl couldn't stop staring at the central table where the 3 independent auditors were leafing through the contract with increasingly serious, increasingly grave, increasingly worried facial expressions. The minutes dragged on like endless hours. 45 minutes of unbearable tension later, the lead auditor finally rose slowly from his chair. He walked with heavy steps to Augusto, who was standing near the window looking out at the city below. The auditor spoke in a relatively low voice, but the absolute silence in the room made it possible for everyone present to hear every devastating word he uttered. "Mr. Montalvo, I am deeply sorry to inform you that the girl is completely correct in her analysis. Clause 47B, strategically disguised and buried in the middle of the document as if it were just another standard technical intellectual property protection, actually transfers in a completely clear, albeit intentionally obscurely worded manner, the total, absolute and irrevocable control of all your registered and future patents to the foreign partner company. In practical and legal terms, Mr. Montalvo, you would be at this moment signing over the complete surrender of your own company, of the empire you built over 2 decades. They could, completely legally and backed by this contract, remove you from the board of directors in less than 6 months, and there would be absolutely nothing you could do about it. The impact of the auditor's words was like a silent thermonuclear bomb exploding in the center of the room. Augusto Montalvo, the man who controlled billions and never showed weakness publicly, went visibly pale. His hands clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned completely white. The foreign executive in the grey suit stood up from his chair so abruptly that he almost knocked it over, trying to say something quickly in German, gesturing defensively, but his words came out jumbled and unconvincing. Augusto raised his hand one last time, but this time the gesture was different. It wasn't of authority, but of profound weariness and disillusionment. "Get out," he said in a low voice that carried an overwhelming weight. "All of you, lawyers, partners, executives, get out of this building now, immediately. Mr. Montalvo, please. We need to talk calmly about this. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation." "Doctor." Tavares tried one last time, desperate to save the situation and his reputation. "Get out before I call security," Augusto roared, and this time there was something dangerous in his eyes. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances and began to hastily gather their belongings. The foreign executive mumbled something incomprehensible and quickly left the room as if fleeing a fire. The entire legal team, all the international partners, were escorted out by security. The television cameras were abruptly shut off. The confused and frustrated journalists were politely but firmly dismissed without full explanations. When finally the enormous hall was practically empty, with only a few basic staff members still present, Augusto walked slowly and heavily to where Lucia was, still clinging to her mother. Each step he took seemed to carry the weight of a mountain. Yandira instinctively pulled her daughter closer, afraid of what the powerful billionaire might do now that his anger had no other targets. But Augusto, to everyone's absolute surprise, simply knelt on the cold Italian marble floor, coming to exactly the same eye level as the little girl. Up close, Lucia could see he wasn't as young as he appeared from afar. There were deep wrinkles around his eyes, streaks of grey starting at his temples, an ancient weariness that no amount of makeup could fully hide. "How did you figure this out?" he asked, and his voice was different now. There was no anger, no authority, no coldness, just genuine curiosity, and something that sounded strangely like humility. Lucia, still trembling but less terrified now, shyly showed the worn notebook she clutched to her chest. I read a lot, sir," she said softly. "Difficult words. Whenever I hear or see a word I don't know, I write it down and try to find out what it really means. I try to understand what people are trying to hide when they use overly complicated words. My teacher at school says that difficult language isn't sometimes to explain better, but to hide the truth from those who haven't studied as much." Augusto took the notebook with reverent care, as if it were a sacred and precious object. He slowly flipped through the yellowed pages, meticulous notes on complex legal vocabulary, definitions copied from library dictionaries, technical economic terms with explanations in simple language written by the girl herself, sentences copied from old newspapers, with circles drawn around words that seemed important or suspicious. He carefully returned the notebook to Lucia's small hands and then did something no one had ever seen him do in decades of his career. His voice completely failed him, choked with genuine emotion. "You saved my life," he said, and tears were beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. You saved everything I've built, and I didn't even know your name until this moment." Lucia didn't know what to say. Chandira was crying silently, hugging her daughter tightly. "What's your name?" Augusto asked gently. "Lucia, sir. Lucia da Silva Santos." "Lucia," he repeated, as if etching the name into his memory forever. "You're 9 years old, and you saw what a team of lawyers with decades of experience and expensive degrees didn't. Or worse, what they saw but chose to hide from me for money." He fell silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what had almost happened. "How many people like you are out there?" he said, more to himself than to her. "How many brilliant children are cleaning floors next to their mothers because no one ever gave them a chance? How many geniuses have I passed every day in this hallway without ever looking them in the eye?" Augusto slowly stood up, as if he had aged 10 years in that single hour. He looked at Chandira with an expression she had never seen on any of the wealthy bosses she had worked for. Genuine respect. "You have an extraordinary daughter," he said simply. Chandira could only nod, still unable to speak. "And I have a debt that's impossible to repay." The news spread across social media and traditional media like an uncontrollable wildfire in dry forest. In less than 6 hours, the story of the 9-year-old girl who prevented a billion-dollar fraud was on absolutely every news portal in the country and was beginning to appear in international outlets. The security footage from the room, where it was perfectly possible to see the exact dramatic moment Lucia interrupted the signing ceremony, mysteriously leaked and went viral instantly. Within 24 hours, there were over 50 million views. Comments in literally dozens of different languages filled social media. The cleaner's daughter saved the billionaire from his own arrogance. A 9-year-old with an old notebook saw what lawyers charging $3,000 an hour hid. While the rich played at power, the poor girl from the outskirts read the truth no one else wanted to see. This shows that intelligence has nothing to do with money or expensive degrees. Augusto Montalvo, after 3 days of calculated silence while he processed everything that had happened and made important decisions, called an extraordinary press conference. This time, it wasn't to celebrate a lucrative billion-dollar deal. It was to do something he had never done publicly in his entire career: apologize and admit fault. The press room of the building was completely packed. Cameras from all the major outlets, national journalists and international correspondents, photographers vying for the best angles. When Augusto entered, the silence was instantaneous. He positioned himself behind the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak without reading any prepared remarks. "I built an empire worth over $2 billion. He said in a firm but unarrogant voice. "I've employed thousands of people. I've developed technologies that have changed entire industries. I've been called a visionary, a business genius, a revolutionary. But 3 days ago, I almost lost absolutely everything because I made the oldest and most stupid mistake in human history: arrogance." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I blindly trusted people because they had expensive degrees hanging on their walls, because they wore Italian suits and spoke with sophisticated vocabulary that made me feel like I was dealing with the best. I believed that competence came with silk ties and Swiss watches. And because of that monumental arrogance, I almost signed a document that would have handed over 2 decades of work, all my patents, my entire legacy, to people who planned to deceive me from the first handshake." Murmurs swept through the room. Cameras clicked incessantly. Augusto continued, "And who saved me wasn't another billionaire. It wasn't an international consultant. It wasn't any of the incredibly expensive lawyers I paid fortunes to monthly. Who saved me was a 9-year-old girl, the daughter of the woman who cleans the floors of my office every single day. A kid attending a public school that's on strike, who jots down words in an old notebook because they want to understand the world, who's never had access to anything money can buy, but who possesses something I'd completely lost, the ability to see truth through pretty lies. He made a gesture, and for the first time in the history of that press room, two completely unexpected people walked onto the stage. Jandira, still wearing her blue work uniform because she'd come straight from her shift, her hands rough from cleaning, her eyes wide with fear in front of so many cameras, and beside her Lucia, her worn notebook tucked under her arm, wearing the only Sunday outfit she owned, her sneakers scuffed but clean. The silence in the room was so profound you could hear people breathing. Augusto turned to them, then back to the microphone. These two women taught me more in one day than I learned in 20 years building companies. They reminded me that dignity can't be bought, that intelligence doesn't need a degree to exist, that sometimes the wisest person in the room is the one nobody's willing to listen to. He took a deep breath before continuing. Therefore, from this moment on, I am announcing the following permanent changes. First, Jandira will receive a permanent contract with the company, with a living wage that's actually livable in Los Angeles. Full health insurance for her and her family, educational assistance, and all the working conditions she always deserved, but which I, in my blindness, never bothered to offer. Applause began to echo through the room. Jandira covered her face with her hands, crying. Second, Augusto continued, raising his voice, I am establishing a permanent fund of $100 million for full scholarships exclusively for young people from underserved communities. Scholarships that will cover not only tuition but also transportation, meals, school supplies, computers, everything necessary so that talent isn't wasted due to lack of resources. The first name on this list, with a lifetime scholarship guaranteed through a PhD if she wants it, is Lucia da Silva Santos. The room erupted in applause. Flashes popped non-stop, but Lucia didn't smile. She looked at all those people, at all those cameras, and then approached the microphone. Augusto, surprised, lowered the mic to her height. And the 9-year-old girl said something no one expected, something that would be reported in newspapers around the world the next day. I don't want to be treated like an exception. Her thin voice rang out clearly through the sound system. I don't want to be the feel-good story rich people tell themselves to feel better. I want all kids like me, all the children of housekeepers, janitors, security guards, delivery drivers, to have the same chance to read, to study, to understand the world. Not because some billionaire felt sorry and decided to be nice one day, but because it's fair, because it's a right, because intelligence doesn't choose where it's born. The silence that followed was unlike any other. It wasn't of shock or surprise. It was of collective shame. It was the uncomfortable silence of a room full of privileged people, realizing, perhaps for the first time, the reality that had always been there, but which they'd chosen not to see. Lucia continued, her voice now firmer. My mum works hard every day. She's always worked hard. But you never asked her name. You never looked her in the eye. You never wanted to know if she had kids, if she had dreams, if she had problems. To you, she was invisible. Just like the man who brings the coffee, just like the woman who cleans the bathrooms, just like the security guard at the door. All invisible. She looked directly into the main cameras. If you really want a better world, it's not enough to give a scholarship to one kid and think you've done your job. You need to change how you see people. You need to stop thinking that people with money are smarter, that those with expensive degrees are more trustworthy, that those who clean floors have nothing important to say. Augusto, beside her, had tears streaming freely down his face now, and he wasn't alone. Several journalists in the room were openly weeping. Cameras trembled in the hands of emotional operators. Lucia took a step back, and Jandira pulled her into a tight hug. Mother and daughter, embracing in the center of that stage, in front of dozens of cameras, represented something much bigger than themselves. They represented all the invisible people, all those who work hard but are never seen, all those who are intelligent but are never heard. And in that moment, something began to change. Not immediately, not magically, but like a seed planted in fertile soil. 3 years have passed since that day that changed everything. Lucia is now 12, and in the 7th grade at one of the best private schools in Los Angeles. But she never moved to a wealthy neighborhood. She still lives in the same modest house in the neighborhood, on the same dirt road, near the same neighbors she's always known. The difference is that now the house has the necessary renovations. It has books on new shelves. It has a computer where she can research and study. Jandira no longer cleans floors. She works in Augusto's company's Human Resources Department, in a special program she helped create. An initiative that trains and values general services employees, offering vocational courses, opportunities for internal growth, and most importantly, dignity and respect. The scholarship fund created by Augusto has already benefited over 1,200 children and adolescents from underserved communities. Many of them are now studying in public and private universities, pursuing degrees in medicine, engineering, law, architecture. Some are already graduating and returning to their communities as teachers, doctors, public defenders. But the most profound change wasn't in the numbers. It was in something less measurable, but infinitely more important: awareness. Lucia's story had touched something fundamental in American society. It didn't solve all the problems, obviously. Inequality was still enormous. Racism continued to kill. Injustice still prevailed in most cases. But now there was a crack in the wall of indifference. People began to pay attention to the stories of the invisible. Companies began to rethink how they treated basic service employees. Schools began to value knowledge regardless of social origin. It wasn't a complete revolution, but it was a real beginning. Lucia continued to read voraciously, continued to jot down words in notebooks. She now had a whole collection of them, carefully organized by theme. But now, she also wrote. Her writings on social justice, the power of language to include or exclude, and education as a right, not a privilege, were published in newspapers, websites, and magazines. She had become an important voice, but never lost her humility or connection to her roots. On the Thursday afternoon, Augusto Montalvo invited Lucia to speak at a major corporate event on leadership and innovation. The auditorium was packed with executives, entrepreneurs, investors, the kind of people who usually made the country's important decisions. When it was her turn to speak, Lucia walked onto the enormous stage. She wasn't wearing expensive or fancy clothes. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt that read, "Education is a right, not a privilege." Comfortable sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked at that audience of powerful, wealthy people, took a deep breath, and began to speak with the same clarity and courage she had at 9 years old. "When I was 9, I saved a billionaire from losing everything," she began, and silence fell immediately. "Everyone thinks this is a story about me being smart, but it's not. This is a story about you choosing to be blind." Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "No, I didn't do anything extraordinary that day," Lucia continued. "I just read what was written. Anyone with a quality basic education could have done the same. The extraordinary part wasn't my intelligence. The extraordinary part was that a room full of adults with expensive degrees, decades of experience, with all the resources in the world, didn't want to see the truth that was right in front of them. Or worse, some saw it and chose to hide it." She walked across the stage, gesturing naturally. "My mother was always smart, always strong, always capable. But you never asked. You never wanted to know. To you, she was just the woman in the blue uniform who cleaned the floors. Invisible, disposable, unimportant. Lucia stopped at center stage. How many other people like my mother work in your buildings? How many brilliant people do you pass every day without ever looking them in the eye? How much talent do you waste because these people weren't fortunate enough to be born into wealthy families? She let the question hang in the air for a few long seconds. That day, 3 years ago, I didn't just save Mr. Augusto. I saved myself too. Because if I had stayed quiet, if I had been obedient and invisible as I was taught to be, my life would be completely different today. And you would never have known I exist. Just like you don't know millions of other children exactly like me who have immense potential but will die invisible because the system was designed to keep them that way. The audience was completely silent. Some looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Others discreetly wiped their eyes. So when you applaud this story, when you say it's inspiring and moving, I want you to ask yourselves, what are you actually going to do? Are you going to create more scholarship programs and think you've fulfilled your social responsibility? Or are you going to truly look at the people who work with you, for you, around you? Are you going to learn their names? Are you going to listen to their stories? Are you going to recognize their humanity? Lucia took a deep breath and concluded, if you truly want to honor what happened that day, don't make me an exception. Don't make me the story of the poor little thing who made it. Instead, change the system that makes stories like mine rare. Fight so that it's not extraordinary for an intelligent child to have access to quality education. Fight so that it's not surprising for a cleaner to be treated with dignity and respect. She looked directly at Augusto, who was in the front row. Mr. Augusto learned an important lesson that day. And I learned one too. My voice has power. My mother's voice has power. The voice of every person society tries to silence has power, and I will never be quiet again, and I hope you won't be either. Lucia took a step back and gave a slight bow. The silence lasted for 3 full more seconds, and then the entire audience stood up. It wasn't polite, perfunctory applause. It was a standing ovation that lasted over 5 minutes. People were openly crying. Tough executives wiped their eyes with handkerchiefs. Augusto stood, applauding forcefully, tears streaming freely down his face. When Lucia came off stage, Jandira was waiting for her backstage. Mother and daughter embraced in silence for a long moment. They didn't need to say anything. That embrace contained everything: gratitude, pride, love, hope, and above all, reclaimed dignity. As they left the event, Lucia looked back one last time. She saw all those powerful people still talking, still processing what she had said. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small in front of them. She felt equal, because now she understood a fundamental truth. True power doesn't come from money, from a degree, or from social position. True power comes from the courage to speak the truth when everyone else prefers comfortable lies. It comes from the courage to be seen when everyone wants you to remain invisible. It comes from the courage to use your voice when everyone expects your silence. And Lucia da Silva Santos, the cleaner's daughter who once saved a billionaire, had discovered her voice. And that voice now would echo forever. So, what did you think of this story? Did it make you think about how we treat people around us? About how many important voices we ignore every day? Leave in the comments what you felt, which part touched you the most, and if this story changed anything in how you see the world. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and hit the bell. Every day there's a new story like this, one that will touch your heart, make you reflect, and maybe even change a little how you see people. Because everyone has a story. Everyone deserves to be seen, and everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves dignity and respect. Until the next story. And remember, sometimes the most important voice is the one no one was willing to hear.